Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Full-Time Whittle podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Wigan MP Lisa Nandy. First and foremost, Lisa, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm looking forward to the day when you can stop having me on your podcast. Not that it's not always a pleasure, but maybe the day when we can do the final one where we celebrate the club's long-term future having been secured and we're no longer going round in circles about it. It feels like this has been going on for a very long time now.
Yeah, it's been 5 months now, pretty much, maybe a little bit less since the club entered administration in July. And I'd like to ask, what is your opinion on the current state of affairs at Wigan Athletic, given the club is still pending a Spanish takeover 7 weeks after an agreement was reached?
It's quite a frustrating situation. Like you said, Jay, we shouldn't still be in this position where we're still in administration. And obviously, being in administration has really taken its toll on the club. Seen a lot of players sold off, a lot of assets sold off. The longer this goes on, the worse it gets for us. So there's definitely a feeling that I share amongst a lot of sort of key people who are trying to resolve this, that we've got to get on with this. The situation as it stands, as you rightly said, is that the Spanish consortium have applied to the EFL. That decision hasn't yet been made. I understand it's not likely to be made particularly quickly. There's a lot of information that the EFL have requested from the potential owners, some of which has been provided. There was a meeting this week. They're looking into particularly probing very carefully around the finances, the budget, the future projections. They're also looking at the background of the people involved. You can see why the EFL would want to be very careful about that. The last thing that we want is to go from a place where we replace one owner that doesn't have the club's interests at heart with another. And so I can understand why they're being cautious. The problem is that the administrators have been quite clear that they don't want to talk to any other bidders until the EFL has made a decision. And so in many ways we're quite stuck between the EFL, who aren't likely to make a decision very quickly, and the administrators, who are very reluctant to explore other options, of which there are a number.
In regards to the EFL and their vetting process with the owners and directors test, how difficult is it for them now to adapt? Because usually with the business plans and forecasts for finances, it doesn't account, obviously, the lack of fans and the new football post-COVID economy we're now looking at.
I mean, I think they're able to make a judgment about whether they think that the budget stacks up. So obviously it's slightly moving feast. New money being announced for League One and Two clubs, for example, recently. So some things are changing, and obviously the political situation is changing as well. That there is increasing pressure on the sports minister to ensure that no club fails, and there have been statements recently saying that no club will be allowed to fail. But I think just the very basics of the budget, whether it is sound, whether it's based on realistic projections, I think the EFL can make a decision about that. I know that one of the concerns, which I shared, was around the very immediate and almost first thing that the Spanish consortium did was to talk to staff and to tell them that they needed to take a 30% pay cut. We all understand that we're in a different situation than we were earlier this year, and I think most people have adjusted their expectations. But it did worry a lot of people, including me, that that would be the first thing that would happen. Whether that signals that there isn't going to be money invested in the club, that there isn't, huge amounts of money to go around. Those were the sort of questions that I was asking the Spanish consortium, and I think I'd be amazed if the EFL weren't asking those questions as well. And I really do think that they're right not to approve this until they're satisfied with those questions. All the way through this, I've just been really concerned that we might end up in a Bury type situation where we end up with one bad owner replaced with another, and by the time you unravel that, it's become so complex, it becomes impossible to save the club. So we're exploring other options. We're talking to the administrators. We're trying to persuade them that it would make sense to at least talk to other potential bidders, and to look at other options, because I think the risk is that if this just keeps dragging on, then the club will survive. We'll make sure the club survives, but in what state is the question.
There's obviously been discussions over the last couple of weeks between, obviously, the supporters club, the Spanish bidders, the Wigan Council. Have you been privy to any of those?
Yeah, I wasn't at the meeting with with the EFL. The EFL had asked to see the prospective bidders, including the actual potential owners, because a lot of the negotiations have taken place with their front man until recently, and with the supporters club as well. Myself and the council weren't in that meeting, but I've been talking to. It feels like on a daily basis, I've been talking to a combination of the prospective bidders, including the Spanish consortium, to the council, to staff at the club who are also working very hard to try and sort this out, to the supporters club as well, and to the administrators, just to see if we can find a way to break the deadlock. I think there is definitely a concentration of minds. I think the administrators want this to happen and want this to happen relatively quickly. I think the EFL would like to get on and secure the club's long-term future. I think all of the bidders, including obviously the front runners, the Spanish consortium, would like to see this resolved quite fast. But the problem is people have got different ideas about what a resolution would look like. And we've been trying to see if there's a way of breaking that deadlock, including keeping the option of the supporters club taking over the club alive. In the end, I think that may be where we need to go. Whether the supporters club take over the club in the long term is another question, but at least in the short term, I think that probably is the best route to unlocking this at this stage.
How would that work in terms of the supporters club running the club? Would they buy the club and then find a buyer for the long term?
Yeah, so we've been talking to a number of other clubs. Have been like the support from the football world has been absolutely amazing, and there are a number of different ways that you can do this. So we talked to Portsmouth, for example, quite early on. They spent a couple of hours with us just going through everything that they'd done. You can either buy it, take it over, and try and keep the club going yourself, like do it as a long-term prospect. I think that's quite difficult with a club like Wigan Athletic, not least because although we've all adjusted our expectations, there's no reason why this club shouldn't go on to go back into the Championship at some stage. And although we're all very keen to sort of steady the ship and stabilise the situation, that would require an injection of cash that it's unlikely the supporters club would have access to, or that the council would be able to assist with. So the other option, possibly the more likely option, although I don't want to put words in the supporters club's mouths, because it's for the fans to determine where this goes. But the other option would be to take it over, to stabilise the situation, to get through the season, and to start exploring other bidders and securing the club's long-term future. And that at least gives us control over what happens. The problem with a club going into administration is that you lose all control over that process. And although the administrators have an interest in making sure that the club survives, their interest is slightly different from the fans' interest, which is just simply the well-being of the and future of the club. So I think it would be a more helpful way to proceed at this stage.
Do you think the Bedby trainer administrators would be on board with that?
And I think the benefit for them of the supporters club coming in as an alternative is that it gets this situation unlocked. I'm not sure that there will be a resolution to the EFL decision about the Spanish consortium anytime soon. The conversations I've had with the EFL, they say it's enormously complex. There's a lot they've got to look at, and so this could take some time. So it has the benefit of resolving this much more quickly, with the support of the council, who don't even actually need to provide a loan, just a facility that we could draw on with the money that is going to be given to League One clubs. I think, and the money that's been raised publicly, I think that it's almost certain that we can make sure that we've got the money that we need to reassure the EFL. And more than that, that the EFL do look very sympathetically on fan-led bids for clubs. So the chances of this being delayed with the EFL, I think, are fairly small. And that is a big benefit to the administrators, because one of their concerns is that if they say, okay, we're not extending the exclusivity period and we're going to talk to other bidders, do they then run into the same problem with another potential bidder where they agree a deal with them, it goes to the EFL and then it doesn't get approved, or that the situation drags on for some time? So there's a real benefit to the supporters club stepping in and taking this step at the moment. And the exclusivity period, it runs out on Friday. So, we could actually see progress next week if all parties were willing to show a little bit of flexibility.
In this instance, how would wages and costs be covered? And would this mean that the DW Stadium would likely be sold separately?
I don't think so. No. So that certainly isn't the intention. So over the course of the last few months, we've been talking to various interested parties around how to secure the future of the stadium as well, because obviously it's really important for Wigan Athletic. It's also important for Wigan Warriors, and both clubs having a place to play is really important for the town. So obviously there are other people like Ian Lenigan who have been doing some work. He originally did some work trying to put together a bid for the club in its entirety, but who is very keen to work with the supporters club in order to ensure that the stadium continues to operate. We've looked at various different options about that, in terms of who actually owns it and who pays rent on that stadium. But we think it's viable. We think we've put forward a business case, which we've been discussing with the council. We think it's absolutely doable, that you can continue to have the stadium available for both Wigan Athletic and Wigan Warriors to play in, and safeguard that, and continue to pay the staff properly and treat them properly, which is really important because the club is a family, and that's why it's done so well. That's a combination of money from the windfall for the League One clubs, from the money that's been raised from the public, from assistance that the council may be able to provide, at least, to provide a facility so that if we did need to draw on some money in the short term, that we could. And we're working on that this week as well. We're refreshing that plan in light of what we now know. But we think it's definitely doable. Whether it's sustainable in the long term, we're not sure, but it's certainly doable in terms of safeguarding the club for the next couple of seasons.
Given the unique predicament Wigan are in, hosting two established sports sides at their local venue, the DW Stadium, is it possible that the DW Stadium could be bought under ownership of the local authorities?
Well, the local authority actually already own a stake, as you know, in the stadium. And so there is a question about whether, if the stadium isn't sold, if the club, for example, did revert to the supporters club, but the stadium just wasn't sold, whether the local authority would actually automatically become the owners of the stadium in its entirety because of the stake that they currently own. So obviously the question for the council is, it wouldn't be a responsible thing for them to spend public money, especially in the middle of a pandemic, buying a stadium that in fact legally they're likely to already own. So they've been, rightly in my view, they took a bit of stick on social media because I think people wanted to see, a quicker and more comprehensive plan from the council about how they were going to support this. But they've been careful, they've been working with us, and they've been incredibly supportive. They take every call, no matter what time of day or night. They drop things and attend meetings. They've put lots and lots of time into going through the budget plans with us and the future projections. And they've said all along that they're determined to work with us to make sure that Wigan Athletic doesn't fail. But they've been cautious about it, and I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. The fact that they've got a stake in the stadium in and of itself has been incredibly important to us as well, because it's prevented any kind of sale during this process, which we've seen with lots of other things, including the training ground, which was really sad.
That's a great point. And another question I'd like to ask you in terms of the supporters club is, how would the supporters club possibly pass the budget and sustainability part of the EFL's owners and directors test?
Well, it's a combination of the funding that we've already raised, plus some support from the council. We've got the problem that every club has got, which is that we don't have crowds in the stadium at the moment, and we haven't got the prospect of raising money through hospitality. The vaccine is a bit of hope on the horizon, which we badly needed. I have regular briefings with the chief medical officer and chief scientific officer in my capacity as a member of the shadow cabinet, and it is looking very likely that we're going to see some movement on that, certainly by spring. But we're not banking on that. We're working with what we know and what we've got at the moment. We're really lucky. I know I've said this before, but we're so lucky to have Jonathan Jackson, who the club's chief executive, who was made redundant but is still working tirelessly to do this. He knows the club inside out and football inside out, and he's managed to work with us to put together a budget that I think the EFL would consider to be reasonable, and would get us through the owners and directors test.
To revert back to the Spanish bidders, at the start, when you first spoke publicly about them, you was very positive and about what the future held for Wigan. Do you still hold the same stance?
Yeah, they're very nice people, very sort of proactive. They came in very quickly with a bid, which is one of the reasons that the administrators are a little reluctant to end the exclusivity period, because as you know, Jay, we've had a lot of people who are interested, some of whom have been absolutely serious and good people and good prospects in my view, but some of whom really haven't. And I spent a lot of time talking to those people over the last few months, as have the administrators and others. So I was very positive about the fact that a bid had gone in and it had been accepted. The terms of the bid with the Spanish are that the administrators have agreed with them that they take over the club from the 1st of October. And that's quite important, because if the deal is approved, they'll be liable for the running costs from the 1st of October. And that's another reason why the administrators are quite reluctant to move away from the Spanish consortium. I guess the difficulty is that I don't have the access to the information that the EFL has had. I don't have the long-standing expertise that they've got in assessing the suitability of people to take over a club. And I think there are questions definitely about the budget, about the background and intentions of the people who are taking over the club, that do have to be looked into really seriously. And I guess just my concern at the moment is that I've spoken to other potential bidders. There is at least one other party that I think is absolutely serious and credible. And although I like the Spanish, I appreciate the fact that they reached out to us very early on in order to try and build some local connections. In the end, my job is not to be the advocate for one bidder or another. My job is to make sure that we secure the future of this club. And at the moment, it looks to me like that would be best served by the administrators talking to other potentially interested parties to see if we can break the deadlock.
Do you think it is likely that the issues not allowing the supporters club or the Football League to agree the deals will get solved?
Well, how do you mean that?
I heard that right. Obviously, there's the EFL released a statement last week saying there's a number of outstanding issues. Do you believe these outstanding issues can get solved?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, what I don't know is how much money the Spanish consortium actually have. It turns out, I mean, I've been on a steep learning curve about the football world since earlier this year, and it turns out running a football club costs an awful lot of money. So obviously the EFL have to absolutely satisfy themselves that the money is there. And also about the intentions of the people behind it. And that's one of the reasons I was quite concerned about the attempt to cut costs by reducing staff costs, because if that's the first thing that you have to do, it does raise questions about whether the level of investment that is needed over the next few years would actually be there or not. There are questions that have been raised about the people behind the bid. One of the complexities of this is that obviously they're based in Spain. They're not here because of COVID, and they don't speak English. And the EFL have rightly said it's not acceptable for us to approve this on the basis of not having met them. So that's been one of their key demands, and I think that they're absolutely right to say that, and to interrogate the background of those people as well, and the suitability to run the club. So I'm not sure if they can be resolved, if I'm honest. I think it's looking quite difficult. And that's one of the reasons why I really do think the administrators, they granted an exclusivity period. They've already extended it. They've given the process the opportunity to work. It hasn't worked, and we're still piling up operating costs for October and November. We're moving closer to December. The longer this goes on, the worse it gets for the club. So I think in the interests of the club, we really do need to widen that conversation again now.
Do you fear that the lengthy delay in all the processes means that the club run out of funds? The admins have already stated that the funds will run out in the next couple of months if the takeover isn't completed. Do you believe it's a realistic outcome that this could happen if nothing's resolved?
Yeah, I think it absolutely could. And I think the administrators know that. I've certainly talked to them about that in the last week. I think the EFL know that as well. I mean, the EFL have said that no club will be allowed to fail. And I think there is potential for some funding, some interim funding may have already been granted. I've been looking into that. I'm not sure, but there is potential for some interim funding. But there is an absolute risk that if this goes on, what we just get is more and more attrition, and then eventually the club does not survive. And I think everybody is aware of that. And that's why in the last 7 days, we've really stepped up our efforts, myself, Jonathan Jackson, the supporters club, the council, to make sure that that we've been talking to the EFL to say we could do with a decision. We've been talking to the administrators to say we need you to widen the conversation. We've been talking to other bidders to say, is there a potential to break the deadlock? I certainly had a conversation with one of the bidders about the potential to take on some of the operating costs, which is one of the administrators' key concerns. And also, really importantly, I think to keep the supporters club bid alive and to do some work on refreshing that so that we're ready to go. Because one of the concerns that the administrators have too is that if they step away from the Spanish bid, they're potentially left with very limited options. And obviously that, if those bids turn out not to be serious, I think one of them is, but if that turns out not to be the case, they're worried that leaves them with no options. And so we've got to demonstrate, and we will demonstrate by the end of this week, that there is an option available, and that ending the exclusivity period will not mean in any circumstances the end of the club.
That's a really interesting point, and I want to obviously push more on the supporters club now. In their statement at the start of November, the Wigan Athletic supporters club announced they felt they were unable to move forward with the proposed deal with the Spanish bidders at the time. Have been kept in the loop on these discussions, and if so, can you expand further on the discussions that the supporters club have had with the Spanish bidders, and as to why they've not yet come to an agreement?
Well, I guess, so I talk to the supporters club quite a lot, and obviously they make the decisions around that. I'm very supportive of the decisions that they make. I think in the end, the fans have to decide. It's not for me to decide. But they're very, very aware that they have a big responsibility, that the amount of money raised is incredibly significant. I mean, it astonished all of us how quickly we managed to raise so much money. And for a lot of fans, that they dug really deep into their pockets. People who didn't have a lot of money came and gave us everything that they had. And so they feel a huge sense of responsibility that every penny of that must be spent well and spent wisely. And I think although there were lots of conversations with the Spanish consortium and with their agents, in the end, they didn't feel that they had the guarantees and the assurances necessary about the long-term future of the club to put that money into that bid. Don't forget that they were being offered a very small stake for a very big sum of money. That was one of the concerns that I'd raised with the Spanish consortium, is that I think they were being offered about 4% for over £800,000. I mean, we looked through those figures. They've obviously taken legal advice. That would value the club at around 25 million when the actual bid is for about 3.25. It didn't seem quite right to me, to be honest, and to do that with fans' money for so little return. The supporters club can speak for themselves about their own concerns, but I really do support the decision that they took. They didn't take it lightly, but we were told by the Spanish consortium they would still go ahead with the bid should the supporters club decide not to buy in to it, and that they did have the money to press ahead themselves. And the supporters club have worked very hard to make sure that they maintain a positive relationship with the Spanish consortium. But I think in the end, they have responsibilities that they've got to uphold, and I think they've done the right thing by the fans.
What assurances, in your opinion, do you think needs to be required for the supporters club to agree a deal with the Spanish bidders? What would you look for?
So I think more guarantees around the amount of money that's available. It wasn't at all clear. It hasn't been at all clear to me what investment is actually going into the club. I think initially there was a suggestion that the supporters club could take over um, a sort of a fairly major management role in the club, and I think they felt that was very unrealistic. And so there were adjustments made to the proposal around that, but that was certainly it. I think just having in a way it's sort of a chicken and egg situation, because having EFL approval would be reassuring, and not having that EFL approval and having the EFL having raised a number of concerns with the Spanish consortium didn't particularly help. Similarly, though, the supporters club having raised some concerns sort of set alarm bells off with the EFL as well. So it's one of those very circular things. The treatment of the staff, I think, has worried a lot of us, and the asking staff to take a pay cut. There were projections being made on the basis of decisions that hadn't been made. So, the staff pay cut was part of the original proposal, even though staff hadn't agreed to it. So, outstanding questions, I think, which on the face of it might seem quite small, but actually you do need to understand if you're going to put your weight behind a bid. I mean, it's not just the money that the supporters club were being asked to put up, it was their support, and their support would have made it potentially more likely that the bid got approved. But without those assurances, without more of an understanding of who the people are, and what was actually being proposed, I just think it was very difficult for them to be able to say, yes, we wholeheartedly support this bid. The council haven't been able to say that. I haven't been able to say that. We all want to be able to say that. We are kind of desperate at this stage to be able to say, yes, this is the one, let's move ahead and let's get this done and get this nightmare over. But it just wouldn't be in the interest of the club, I don't think, to do that with the information that we've got.
Thank you for the insight. And obviously in this conversation, you've related to that there is fallback options and other interested parties. Can you obviously delve a bit more into that? And obviously, do you believe these bidders are credible in terms of finances, intentions for the club, and obviously passing the owners and directors test?
So there are, apart from the supporters club prospect, which is still a very live bid and proposal, there are two potential interested parties that I've been in contact with over the last few weeks. I think one of those is definitely credible. I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but I'm starting to feel a little bit like one, because we've met so many bidders over the last few months. But I think there's certainly a general consensus amongst a lot of the key parties that the money is definitely there. The rationale for buying the club makes some sense, and the future plans, although we haven't had sight of all of that. The detail is yet to be worked out. There'll have to be a bit of work done. It shouldn't take very long, but that would have to be a bit of work done and negotiations between that bidder and the council. Sorry, not the council, the administrators, to work out the precise details of that. That definitely looks like a realistic and viable option to me. The other proposal, I've seen the details of that. I've seen some of the budget breakdowns. I haven't spoken directly to the people who are financing it, but I have spoken to other parties who are attached to it. I think there are more concerns about that, and the administrators certainly seem to have some concerns about that. They're not speaking to other bidders at the moment because of the exclusivity period, but I've very much picked up that there are concerns about the credibility around one of the bids. But from my point of view, that leaves us with at least two options: the supporters club and one of the bidders, possibly three. And it would make sense at this stage for the administrators to be speaking to those parties who are, after all, they're still putting in a lot of time and effort. They're speaking to me. They've been speaking to some of the fans. They've been in touch with Jonathan Jackson, with the supporters club, with the council. They're obviously serious about trying to buy the club. So it would be helpful, I think, at this stage if the administrators were to cast their net a bit more widely, just to make sure that they haven't closed off options that could help us to resolve this.
In an article published in Wigan Today on Sunday, November 15th, a Wigan businessman based in Hong Kong expressed his interest in buying Wigan Athletic and revealed plans to invest large amounts of money into both the club and town. He also mentioned he had positive responses from the Wigan Council, yourself, the supporters club and Wigan Warriors. What contact has this bidder had with you?
So I don't know him. I haven't spoken to him directly. Had some contact through Ian Lenigan about the potential prospect of them bidding for it if the exclusivity period ended. Like I take, if Ian sends me something, I always take it seriously. I think he has his town's interests at heart, but I was a bit surprised to see that in the Wigan Observer. To be honest, I haven't had any contact with that individual. And I think, although I understand that other parties have had some direct contact, I think it would be a stretch to say that anybody is supporting that bid. We're not opposed to it, of course we're not. If somebody's interested in taking over this club and helping us to secure its future, we'll absolutely welcome them with open arms. But we obviously need to do due diligence. We need to see the details of that, and at this stage it's just not accurate to say that support has been given.
Obviously, do you know, with the party that's just been mentioned, do you know if they've had any discussions with the council about what they're going to provide to Wigan as a town?
Yeah, there've been various different proposals made by different bidders. Some of them sound very exciting but fairly outlandish. But I think all of the parties that are currently involved or currently potentially putting in bids or have put in bids have some understanding that the town matters to the club as much as the club matters to the town, and that having those local relationships is very important, and having some investment is important. I'm not aware of any sort of concrete proposals. There was one bidder, for example, earlier in the process who wanted to set up a cricket academy in Wigan. There are others that have been trying to set up casinos and nightclubs and all sorts of ideas. But I think the thing that I found reassuring, at least about one of the potential bidders, is and certainly for the supporters club, is the understanding the understanding that actually what you need to do most if you're going to support this town is come in right now and stabilise the situation at the club, make sure that we keep the staff we have, keep the players that we have, start to invest, protect the assets, and then slowly start to rebuild. And I think that's probably the best that anyone can do for us at the moment.
I think that's a great answer. And just to sum things up now, how would you reflect on the last 4.5, 5 months of Wigan Athletic being in administration? Because it's been such a difficult period for everyone involved. It's been very stressful. It's almost seemed a bit like a merry-go-round at times, with the amount of interest in bidders, the amount of people saying it's right, and obviously things not coming into tuition. So, how would you reflect on it all?
I think it's been like a roller coaster in lots of ways. There's been real lows, and then there's been these brief moments of elation where we all thought we were making progress, and then things have fallen apart again. I mean, I think when this is over, I'll probably feel very, very angry about it. I think there'll be a lot to say, and it will be said. But just from the moment that Jonathan rang me and said that the club was going into administration, I think all of us have just felt that can't be our focus at the moment. We don't have the energy to expend on being angry. We've got to sort this out. Like, there is no alternative. The club will not fail. We will ensure that this club is here in another 100 years' time, as it's been for 100 years already. And so we've just got to get through this. We've got to keep going. And with every setback, I mean, there have been days when we've sort of been sitting on Zoom calls in utter despair, but actually then you got to pick yourself back up and you got to go out and find a new solution. And at every moment, that's what people have done. People who've donated, people who've pitched in ideas, the fans groups, the supporters club. Like, one of your things, Jay, about the mental health support for people during this process, that it's been really important because it's kept people together and it's kept us going. And so we will get there. I still feel we'll get there. It's very, very frustrating that we're even having to still be having this conversation. And I say this to you every time we speak, I think, but next few weeks are critical. We've got to break the deadlock, and we've got to get a decision made. But after this call, I'll be making a few more calls again, and I'm hopeful still that we're going to be able to do it.
To end the interview now, this is more generally. And one of the biggest talking points about administration is the large legal and admin fees involved. Do you think it could be possible that, given the state of football finances, that the FA, EFL, or the government could create a non-for-profit organisation, which would be an administration team who could take over clubs in financial crises and run them until the buyer is found, saving on the large sums from regular administrators?
See, this is what I mean about the creativity, because it's something that I've been grappling with quite a lot. I've worked with firms in administration over the past 10 years since I became the MP for Wigan, and I've seen how that process works in the commercial, the business world. But obviously, football is something else again, because it's always heartbreaking in the business world, because it's people's jobs, it's people's livelihoods, people's futures. But football is special. It means something emotionally deeply to a lot of people. It's deeply embedded in the social fabric of the community. It matters to people and their families, and so it's a social asset. It's a social good as well as a commercial asset. And I think this system that allows, first of all, people to come in and buy it who are in no way connected to the club, who are able to play fast and loose with the club's future and pull the plug in circumstances like the one that we saw with Wigan Athletic. I think that is just disgraceful and has got to change. The institutions that are there that are supposed to protect us from that are just not fit for purpose, and that is absolutely clear. But so too is the administration process, to have, to at that moment to hand over control to people who, they can be the nicest people in the world, but they have their own objectives that are somewhat set apart from the club's interests. And that is just, it's been devastating to watch what's happened to Wigan Athletic over the last few months and not be able to step in and do something about it. So yes, I think you're right that it's got to change. Is that the answer? It sounds like it could be. I would have to look at it. But I think, we've got this promised fan-led review of football that has been promised forever, as far as I can tell. The government is still making noises about it. The Prime Minister said something about it last week in the House of Commons. That has absolutely got to be part of that conversation. We just can't let anybody else go through what we've been through, and I never, ever want to be here again.
Likewise, and I think every football fan could echo this, not even Wigan Athletic fans. Administration and liquidation, obviously not happened in our case, but it happened for Bury FC. It's the worst thing that can happen to a football fan. We've seen the impact on Bury, although they are rebuilding with AFC Bury. The impact on the community was so huge. I know Bury fans felt a bit redundant at 3 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon because they knew they should be at Gig Lane, and it's really tough to say. Lisa, I'd like to thank you again for your time. It's been great to hear a bit more insight into the goings on about the takeover and getting your opinion on some really hard-hitting and important matters.
Oh, thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Full Time Whittle podcast with Lisa and Andy, please like this video and subscribe to my channel.